Okay, and here we go. All right. Welcome everyone to uh, Pan-African Studies or PAS and Friends Conversations in Black Volume 7, the Malcolm X Inquiries, Volume 1. And this is the start of something. We'll get to talk about that in a second. I have a couple of our panelists on board. I'm expecting Dr. Horace Campbell to join us when he gets the technology together. And one of the stalwart members of the P.S. and Friends Conversations in Black crew. And what were you? You were our second, I think, doctoral graduate of Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville. And I'm talking about the one and only Dr. Jakia Marie. Thank you so much for joining us again. As I always say, you're my unofficial co-host. All right,
That's
talk to
right.
me so I can hear you. Okay, all right, good, good.
Yeah.
So we got you on board. And also, uh, shoot, Nicholas, you might have been third or fourth or something like that, but one of our early graduates of the University of Louisville Pan-African Studies doctoral program, Dr. Nicholas McLeod, joining us all the way from Cincinnati, Ohio. How are you, sir?
I'm blessed. I'm happy to be here, and it's an honor to share this panel with my esteemed panelists, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Kwame, and um, you know, and everybody, Jakia as well.
Okay, all right. Well, cool runnings, cool runnings. Let me see. Uh-oh, I think I got him. No, let's see. We got to turn him on. We see Dr. Campbell here now. Let's see. How do I do that? I want to, I want to unmute him. Jackie, you know how to do that? He's here. Can you unmute him?
I cannot. I think because
Okay,
I am not
I
the
should. Oh,
host.
that's right. You're okay. Let me. I should be able to do it. I just have to. I thought I could do it just from the screen here, but
I thought you could too.
uh-huh. All right. So I need to uh let me see. What do I need to do? Okay, here we go. I think I can work on this. Hold on. Make an attendee. Is that what I'm doing?
Mm-mm. It has him as a presenter.
Oh,
So
okay. And so I guess is your mic on? Mwalimu, can you talk to us? I think you might actually be ready. Can say something to us? Can you hear us? Can you hear us, Doc? Are you with us? I see him, but it looks like your mic is muted. Yep, your mic is muted on your end somehow.
Can you hear me now?
Ah, we got you now. We got you now. Great, great, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's good to meet you because we actually all meet. Well, we're all meeting you the first time. And so, yes, uh, as the third member of our panel, uh, longtime activist and scholar, uh, one of the actual, major participants in the Pan-Africanist movement, of the second half of the 20th century, the last third at least. Uh, and you're up there at Syracuse University, spreading your knowledge. So, Mwalimu Horace Campbell, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
This is a very important day in global Africa,
Ah, ah,
and we
yeah.
are all full of joy, and we are very happy to participate in this celebration of a life for great Pan African leader and person who struggled for our dignity.
Ah, absolutely, absolutely. Great, 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 great. So I'm gonna turn on this PowerPoint to guide us through some things there. And so yes, we are. I don't even think I said it. So Malimo, thank you for getting that in early. Yes, May 19th, 2025. This is the 100th anniversary of the birth of Malcolm X, a very important person. As Malimu stressed, globally for Black people, not just in America, like a lot of us in America, often think. All right, all right. Let me quickly run through this quick just quick history of this program, this thing that we're doing, and then we'll jump right in. So what do I want to say? So anyway, this is what we're going to do. Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville. Who are we? We've been around since 1973. We've got an undergraduate degree. We've got a master's degree, a doctoral degree. We got an incoming class that we're looking forward to in the fall. And so this series, PAS and Friends Conversations in Black, we started this back in, what was that? Was that September? In September. And, just quickly, some of the subjects we've been doing. What is the Black Studies canon? What are the texts that are important in our history and our knowledge of our history? What else? We did a thing on the election back then. One of the things that we want to do with PAS and Friends Conversations in Black over the duration, actually, not only talk about the canon in terms of what are the texts, but also focus in on some specific classics and important books that we think everybody should know about and should read. And so the first time we did that, back in November, on the 45th anniversary of the liberation of Assata Shakur from prison in New Jersey, we took a look at her book. That was very interesting. What else did we do? The Black Studies canon focus on Africa. I'm just going to move through this stuff right quickly because we got a lot of stuff to cover. So in April, I guess that was just last month, a month ago, we started another one of the sub-series in Conversations in Black, the SNCC Chronicles, Volume 1, where, so similar to Malcolm X, in terms of why there's a series on SNCC and a series on Malcolm X. These are vast subjects that really can't really be done service to in even a single program or something like that. So we just started the SNCC piece last month, focusing on 1960 and the sit-in movement. And so we did that. And back in February, we did a long thing on Malcolm X. Jakia was there on the day after the anniversary. That sounds like the wrong term. They killed him on February 21st. And so we did Malcolm X at 100 there, and that was very lively and very interesting. And yeah, one of the things that came out of that, we knew it already, but one of the things that came out of that, because we actually tried to have some real focus on specific topics, there was, oh man, this subject is worthy of much deeper exploration, and hence, we're here starting Volume 1 of the Malcolm X Inquiries. A series within PAS and Friends Conversations in Black. And let me see, celebrating Malcolm X of 100. This is his 100th birthday, as we said. This is the last, episode? Is that the right term? Of Conversations in Black for the year. We'll start it up again in the fall, probably in September. And you want to close it out on a high note. And so our attempted focus for Malcolm X here in Volume 1 is the OAAU, his organization, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. The OAU, Organization of African Unity, the organization that he and the people with him modeled the OAAU on, and the larger topic of Pan-Africanism, because each in their own way were attempts to deal with this. Or let me just say it like that, without going any further on that. So that's where we are. And so, panelists, we ready to go? Y'all ready to go? I'm gonna take that as a yes. So here's what I sent you all the prompts earlier. So here's what we want to try to accomplish today, or what we want to get to today. Malcolm X's 1964 trips to Africa, the OAAU and its relationship to the OAU, Malcolm's campaign for African support to bring the USA before the United Nations on charges of human rights abuses and even genocide, if you look at the petition. The OAU, so we got to look at the OAU itself also, since this is the thing that Malcolm molded on. What's the relationship between the OAU, Organization of African Unity, and Pan-Africanism? And that leads to I'm sure this is the last point we'll get to, that leaves the question, right? Okay, what exactly is Pan-Africanism? Because that's a term that everyone, I think, recognizes, but I I'm not sure if we have a fixed meaning, consensus meaning of what that is. And so we want to get into that. We won't wrap that up by any means, but we'll start that conversation. And hey, listen, that may lead to another sub-series within PAS and Friends Conversations in Black, exploring Pan-Africanism. That's something that might happen. So let's start then. Let me pull this up a little bit for you guys. Let's start with some words from Malcolm X himself. And so here's a short clip.
Children have to go to school and we need someplace to work. So whatever kind of action program can be devised to get us the things that are ours by right, then I'm for that kind of action no matter what the action is. The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem, which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exists in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans. Our African brothers have gained their independence faster than you and I here in America have. They've also gained recognition and respect as human beings much faster than you and I. Just 10 years ago on the African continent, our people were colonized. They were suffering all forms of colonization, oppression, exploitation, degradation, humiliation, discrimination, and every other kind of Asian. And in a short time, they have gained more independence, more recognition, more respect as human beings than you and I have. And you and I live in a country which is supposed to be the citadel of education, freedom, justice, democracy, and all of those other pretty sounding words. New bridges must be built, because in the minds of the majority of our people today, Africa is too far away. So the only way you and I can point them in that direction is build new bridges. We have to have the type of understanding of Africa and the type of understanding of our people here in order to build a bridge, a contact, a line of communication between the two. And once the lines of communication have been established, and our African brothers can stretch forth their hands and reach us, and we can stretch forth our hands and reach them, why, there's nothing that this blue-eyed man in this country will be able to do to you and me successfully from that day onward. I don't think when a man is being criminally treated, that some criminal has the right to tell that man what tactics to use to get the criminal off his back. When a criminal starts misusing me, I am going to use whatever necessary to get that criminal off my back. Don't blame a cracker in Georgia for your injustices. The government is responsible for the injustices.
Yeah, words from Malcolm X. Yeah, anybody want to react to those? Perhaps? It's fine if you don't. It's fine if you don't.
We do. We most definitely do, but I want the younger people to hear from them. Because that was a speech given in the Audubon Ballroom in December 1964.
Uh-huh.
And that speech is very important because in that speech, you will remember that Malcolm X said, you can't understand what's going on in Mississippi if you don't understand what's going on in the Congo.
Yeah.
Malcolm X was calling on all of our brothers and sisters to see the link between the two struggles. And this is 61 years ago that this kind of speech was made. What is the situation 61 years later?
Absolutely.
In May 2025, May 19th, 100 years after Malcolm X was walking on the planet when he entered this planet, then 60 years after they assassinated him, how do we relate to the current revolution in Africa? The Sudanese revolution, counter-revolution, trying to overthrow the Sudanese revolution. Our knowledge of the plunder of the Congo, the same question that was raised because in the book by Carl Evans, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, At that very meeting, Malcolm X, Che Guevara, and Babu had met,
Yep.
and they had agreed that they would going to make an alliance to free the Congo, because that very same year in 1964, the United States had invaded with mercenaries from Europe in the Congo, and Malcolm X, Che Guevara, and Babu met in New York. 3 months later, after that meeting agreeing to free the Congo, Malcolm X was killed. And they hunted down che Guevara. What is our disposition towards the Congo and the continuing plunder of the Congo? How do we understand what's going on in West Africa in the alliance of Sahelian states? So our responsibilities continue because the continent of Africa and the peoples of Africa are not yet free.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think toward the end of the program, we definitely, I think, going to bring it into contemporary affairs. So I think we might get a chance to explore some of that a little bit more a little bit later. So that's definitely very good to get that on the table, Marlene. Um, so Jackie, I was getting ready. Did you have something? That's cool. No, that's absolutely cool. I don't know what happened to Nicholas, but he'll get back in with us, I'm sure. So I wanted to start this, like I say, Malcolm X in Africa, 2 speeches. So I wanted you all to consider this is something that kind of occurred to me as I was doing some work on this after I sent you all the prompts. So this isn't part of the agenda that I actually sent you guys, but it's just for us to actually consider this history. All right. So, I mean, many of us know Malcolm's famous speech, Message to the Grassroots, given in Detroit, November 10th of 1963. That's actually his most famous speech, in terms of audio form, certainly. And, a number of themes. The theme of the first third of the speech, Black unity. The theme of the next part, like the revolution, what constitutes an actual revolution. And then the last, third or more actually, is his evisceration of the March on Washington. All right, we don't have time to talk about any of that stuff now. I want to come back to that first section when he talks about Black unity. And he uses as his primary example, and he talks about it a lot, the 1955 Asian African Conference in Bandung, Indonesia, right? From 8 years earlier. There were 28 countries, 4 of which were African, right? So it's really more of an Asian conference. Anyway, there's that. So juxtaposing that with something that just happened, what was that? Is that less than 6 months earlier? The founding of the OAU. So I find it striking to consider why the founding of the OAU, in which he could have made all of the points that he makes about the need for Black people, the need for people, no matter which colonial power, they had been under, to come together and unify. It would seem like that would be the more salient example. So it's kind of interesting that instead of using the OAU as an example of Black unity, he actually uses this event from 8 years earlier that really is, like I say, it's only really a tiny minority of Africans who are even involved. So, I mean, I do have some theories about that, but that's an interesting little juxtaposition, and I wanted to see if you all had any reaction to that.
I have a very strong reaction to that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I got one too. You go.
No, but I will let Nicholas and Jackie go, and then I can see if because
Jackie, don't you think that's a little kind of? I think I even want to say a little strange. Now, like I said, yeah. Let me stop there and just.
So go ahead, Nick.
So, I think when I listen to that Bandung reference, I think in that particular part of the speech, Malcolm is honing in on this idea of revolution and the significance of getting, as he says, the white man out of our conversations. And I think that was the premise he's talking about there, in that there were no white delegates or representatives from any other white nations included in this process at Bandung, right? And impressing upon the fact that
was the white man. He
say
couldn't.
what?
I said the only thing that couldn't come was the white man.
Right, exactly. Exactly, right? And so there's that example I think he was trying to press home there. But maybe perhaps there was some uncertainty about the OAU and what it could do, you know, at that moment, right? But I think for sure when he's talking about getting this idea of, you know, being critical of the civil rights movement, right, and trying to get to them this idea to get white folks out of our business, I think that's what he was impressing upon, as opposed to the empowerment, right, that the OAU could be representing in the future.
I heard that. Okay.
Yeah,
Anybody?
I think I'm leaning with Nick. Um, but I think to quite made like to what you said was like, kind of like the obvious example would be the OAU, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to not use the obvious example also shows how big of an impact this particular conference actually is. It's saying like, hey, let's not overlook this thing that happened and see how big it actually what it can represent. So it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to point to the continent, right? Um, and point to what's what's the potential of unity, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also when we talk about Black folks around the world, we have to also look outside of Africa, right? Further, if we're talking about colonialism, exploitation, look at other parts of the world as well. So kind of like showing this collective struggle. And
Okay.
yeah, I think it's basically like showing this collective struggle and like it's all of it, right? It's not just this or that. It's actually all of it. So we know the work that's being done on the continent and our relationship with the continent, but let's also see our relationship with other parts of the world. So Asia or wherever else.
Okay. What's your take on that, Mwalimu?
Yes, I want to look at it in two parts. The first part is the centrality of Bandung in the Pan-African struggle. The Pan-African struggle is the oxygen that kept Bandung going for the past 70 years. There were four struggles that were highlighted then that we still highlight. First one, the Vietnamese struggle. Bandung took place 1 year after the Vietnamese defeated the French at Dien Bien Phu. The second struggle is that of apartheid. The third struggle is that of Mississippi. And the fourth struggle is that of Palestine. These struggles have endured. And what we have is that the Pan-African struggles kept the non-aligned movement and the Bandung movement together all that time. And it is our responsibility inside of Babylon to be able to keep the spirit of Bandung, which is now being regenerated within BRICS. The second part of the discussion about the OAU. The OAU itself came out of a longer process where the Pampmeka, the same meeting of Babu and Lumumba, where Lumumba was introduced to the Pan-African world at the All-African People's Conference in 1958. Pampmeka and the All-African People's Conference were the founding basement for the Organization of African Unity. What were they organized around? Anti-colonialism. And the two main struggles at that point that were armed struggles in Algeria and in Kenya. So Common Boy was made the chairperson of the conference. And at that conference, there was a debate. Should African independence be based on armed struggle or should it be based on the principles of nonviolence? Because Nkrumah was leaning towards nonviolence. Fanon was there. Some was Tom Mboya, and Tom Mboya and Fanon said to the conference, well, we are involved in armed struggle in Algeria and in Kenya. So what should we do? So Nkrumah said to the conference, we will support African liberation by any means necessary.
There you go.
Malcolm X picked up that slogan by any means necessary and became the mantra of the Pan African world. Now, from 1958 to 1963, the Pan African struggle against colonialism was a driving force in international politics. In fact, some of you study international relations. There's a man who called Joseph Nye from Harvard, passed away last week. It was such a driving force that Joseph Nye was in East Africa, did his PhD thesis, and most people don't know that this famous international scholar started his work on Pan-Africanism because they were afraid of where Kenya was going. Joseph Nye, David Apter, all of these great political scientists started studying political science. What was their role? To undermine the work of Nkrumah, Babu, Malcolm X, and those who wanted to fight against apartheid. And we see the fruits of their labor within the university, within what is called Pan-Africanism, within the lines inside of the university about whether you should have solidarity with those fighting against imperialism or whether we should be having kumbaya with Africans regardless of our class. So the OAU was a compromise, but as a compromise, the leading force intellectually and politically in the OAU was the forces fighting against apartheid, colonialism, and Rhodesia. And the victory of the Cubans in Kutcona Valley in 1988 was a culmination of that leadership because they could not have had the diplomatic, military, and political support for fighting against the apartheid regime if you did not maintain that front for the 25 years that the OAU did until the OAU transformed into the AU. In other words, the OAU was a site of struggle. And as a site of struggle, you do not retreat from a site of struggle.
I heard that. I heard that. Well, we're going to come back to the OAU for sure. So that's some good stuff there. So coming back to Malcolm's story, kind of particularly. So yeah. It's interesting choice. To go Bandung rather than OAU. So let's put that in context. Actually, in November 10th, 1963, he's got about 3 weeks or so left in this organization that he devoted his whole life to, this religious organization, the Nation of Islam. He's about to be expelled from that organization. And so let's just jump ahead to March 8th of 1964, because that is that's 4 months later, but it's at that point that Michael has finally, made his peace with the fact that he actually has been expelled. Maybe not formally, but he knows he's out, and so he strikes out on his own, as he said. So there's that. He'll be leaving the country about 5 weeks later to go on this Hajj. The kind of stock speech that he's doing in that month or so in between him announcing his new organization and him leaving for the Middle East and Africa, the Ballad or the Bullet. There's a text version. There's it's one of the other. That's probably his second most famous, recorded speech that people, used to be a record of it, that people used to, circulate and listen to. The Ballad of the Bullet. So what I got for you is just a clip, a minute or so clip from the Ballad of the Bullet, which is where we first have him publicly talking about the whole notion of bringing the United Nations, no, say that right, bringing the United States before the UN, the United Nations. And actually, it doesn't say all that much about specific support internationally, but let's listen to that and then proceed with the story. So, here we go.
So our next move is to take the entire civil rights struggle problem into the United Nations. And let the world see that Uncle Sam is guilty of violating the human rights of 22 million Afro-Americans, and still has the audacity or the nerve to stand up and represent himself as the leader of the free world. Not only is he a crook, he's a hypocrite. Here he is standing up in front of other people, Uncle Sam, with the blood of your and my mothers and fathers on his hands, with the blood dripping down his jaws like a bloody-jawed wolf, and still got the nerve to point his finger at other countries. You can't even get civil rights legislation. And this man has got the nerve to stand up and talk about South Africa, or talk about Nazi Germany, or talk about Portugal. No more days like those.
Yeah, that's from the Ballad of the Bullet speech. It's a kind of a stock speech he'd been given over those several weeks. And like I say, the very next day after this speech, he's actually out of the country. He's off to get his religious credentials in order with the Hajj to Mecca as an Orthodox Sunni Muslim. And after that, I mean, that's what the trip looks like. He actually spends most of his time in the Middle East, Mecca, Beirut, Cairo, and Egypt, also known as United Arab Republic. And toward the end of that trip, a few days in Nigeria, so he's in the English-speaking black world there, and Ghana, which most people, in terms of tracking the story of Malcolm X during this period of time, the Ghana actually is a site of particular interest. This is where he hits upon this notion of a different organization. He talks about the discussions with Afro-Americans in Ghana. He does get a chance to meet with Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana. Got an hour meeting with him. They had met prior in New York City. You can see that graphic there that shows that. But this is a very important trip for Malcolm X in many, many ways. And certainly subsequent to this is some of the things I think Marlima was talking about. Subsequent to this, the content of his speeches has a much higher degree of focus on Africa, I think, than before. And anyway, it influences him in a lot of ways. And so we get to the OAU, right? So he comes back in the country. What did we say? Was it the 21st of May? And what is that? 5 or so weeks later, we have the founding rally of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. In terms of tracking the story of Malcolm X, it's important to know that, right? That's 5 weeks later. And then in terms of, having a real sense of the development of the Organization of African Unity, it's important to realize that 10 days? 10 days after this founding rally, Malcolm is out of the country for about 4.5 months, right? So right after the organization is founded, he's actually gone. Just in terms of, and I cite this just in terms of having an understanding of the development of the OAAU, the extent to which, they were able to, develop a program and even a structure really that there's some serious impediments because the central figure is actually not around. So what I wanted to do from here, folks, is let's take a little bit of a look, y'all. You may or may not be able to read this. We're certainly not going to read a lot of this, but I did want to get some of the text on the screen in case people could see that. So to take just a brief look at the OAAU. So in terms of documents, this is actually the longest, most involved document in terms of like what they actually wrote down as officially in terms of what they were all about. And so actually, I think I would just like maybe read maybe the first paragraph and then just kind of run through it. And then we're going to compare that. We'll see when we go to the next document, the extent to which it really is absolutely modeled on the founding document of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity. So anyway, I'm going to read the first paragraph. The Organization of Afro-American Unity, organized and structured by a cross-section of the Afro-American people living in the United States of America, has been patterned after the letter and spirit of the Organization of African Unity, established at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, May 1963. And it follows the charter there as well. I'm not even going to read through that. I'm going to read through the rest of it because, like I said, we're really using this for a purpose of comparison and also to, to get a sense as much as possible in terms of what the OAAU was about. Like I say, with the understanding of what I just said earlier, it really is an organization that really didn't get a chance to develop, right? Because of the circumstances, the guy being gone, the guy running for his life and all of that. But in terms of that crew who helped put that together, Malcolm X, Lynn Shiflett was her name, John Henrik Clark, and a few others, they hammered out this so at least there could be a document to make a reference when you had the founding rally in June 28th of 1964. So, just to actually quickly point out, in terms of a program, what are the key points? Self-defense, education. You read the education section, spends a lot of time talking about like getting people on the board of education in New York City and such like that. A section on politics and economics, which doesn't really have I went too fast. Doesn't have all that much of a program. Then you got social and culture. So, like I say, this is the document. One of the issues when Malcolm X comes back in late November of 1964, and if you listen to some of those speeches those last couple of months, when he comes back in November, he's got less than 3 months to live. And a lot of those speeches are documented, in some of the collections, and you can actually hear some audio, a lot of those speeches. It kind of makes the point in several of them, including those last ones, actually, like those last couple before he's actually murdered. And you hear him saying, okay, I know we promised you the program last week. I know we promised you the program a few weeks ago. And so he's keeping, this is like I said, this is at the end of his life and everything. But he's keeping to have to explain and apologize why we don't quite have the program together. So just another perspective in terms of the OAU, in terms of how it really, it didn't really have a chance to develop. But that's what we have. And so anyway, I think the point, I'm going to turn it to you guys, but, and I put the OAU charter up. I guess I want to start there with, what do you all think about that? An organization founded, let me get his exact language again. What did they say? Patterned after the letter and spirit of the Organization of African Unity. What is that, is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Like, what is the OAU to be patterning some sort of progressive organization after? That's the part that, I think that's a question worth asking. Yeah, that seems to be a mistake from the get-go. That does not seem to be a proper model, is what I guess I want to say.
Well, I think when we think about the OAU, we're thinking about a huge jump that's recently happened in the anti-colonial struggle within the Pan-Africanist movement. And this is a jump from Pan-Africanism being um, an ideology that mobilizes protest movement, right? It's a jump to where Pan-Africanism is now being discussed in the parliaments and legislative assemblies of independent African states. So it's operating on a governmental and administrative level now. And that's, clearly reflected in the way that the OAU's charter is written, right? It's not just resolutions that are being written, to a government or a collection of governments. This is a statement. This is a statement from independent nations putting the world on notice about how they're going to operate, and that's going to be through Pan-Africanism, right? Through unity, in a time when that was absolutely necessary, especially with where the African continent was going, right? Having just had the Year of Africa, all of these new independent nations that were seemingly divided before this, with the Monrovian and the Casablanca blocks, and now coming together um, for this moment. And so I think when we juxtapose this with the Organization of African American Unity, we can see, the wording is very similar in the way that they write out the charter, and I think it's a reflection of Malcolm's intent to take this grassroots struggle in the U.S. And operate within the same contexts that these African states are operating, and saying, you know what, like Malcolm says, we can't take the criminal to his own court. So the way to do that, to follow through on that, is to make this an international struggle, right, and take that to the international court. And I think we can see that clearly in the way it's written. But also, like you said, those last few speeches that Malcolm's giving, right? You can see a lot of his thoughts, his ideas are being expressed in the charter of the OAAU. Um, and also when I'm reading this, you see the seeds of Black Power as well, the Black Power movement being laid as well. So I mean, it's a phenomenal document, that can be analyzed in several different ways.
Yeah, I'm leaning with Taquame here. So I think I think that like okay, I think that to Nick's point is that the spirit of the idea of the OAU was worth modeling, right? But I think that what actually transpired is not the case. That's not what we wanted to model, which is why it's like, why would you model something like this? Not that anybody could tell what the future will hold, like all of the democratically elected leaders being assassinated and things like that, right? Like obviously nobody was planning on that. But um, but I think that anytime we are focusing on the United Nations and talking about liberation, it's hard to take it too seriously. Um, so I don't know. So I think that the idea of it is, I think if we just focus more on the idea of the OAU, right? Of like in our most, if we think about it in the most romanticized way, then yes, this makes sense to want to model a document and organization after what you think out of what you think the OAU will be. It's just that we now know, obviously, this is decades and decades later, what the reality was. So it's easy
Right.
for us to be more critical when in that moment it really did make a statement. But also we know that even the folks who weren't even the folks who weren't conspired against or anything like that. The heads of states, many of them actually just turned, which is why I think that anytime something is related to the government, it is automatically problematic because it's too easy to be able to turn them. And we saw that with a number of our first African presidents across the continent. So, and they talked very well. Like they talked the talk, but did they walk the walk? And we saw that over years that they simply didn't. So I think that modeling it with an organization that was solely heads of state, and ministers, right, like these political leaders, becomes problematic because you are not as, I'll say, you're not held to the standard as somebody who's basically like from the streets. Because when you're from the streets, I mean, hey, it's your neighbor that's holding you accountable, right? Like you can talk all you want to, but the community is who puts you up and who will have no problem also bringing you down. But that's not necessarily the case when it comes to government. So I think that for Malcolm X's organization, there was actually more. I think there was more accountability measures because it was by because it was created by a group of individuals, not a group of political leaders. So a group of community activists, a group of grassroots activists, a group of people who have been doing the work for decades and decades and are not being influenced so much as these other political leaders.
Yeah, y'all said a lot. Y'all said a lot. I know
I like-
Malik wants to get in on this.
I wanted to add as
Okay. Yeah,
if I
go
could.
ahead. Yeah.
Just that this is a time when drastic changes are happening in the world. And it's sort of a moment where, we can look back, and say, yeah, like, hindsight's 2020. Why would we have any faith in the UN, right? But this is a world of new possibilities that these people are living in. And so to put it out there and to give these structures a try, I don't really fault them for that, right? But what I will say is, like as Jakia said, the accountability component was very different with the OAAU, particularly because although it's modeled after the OAU's charter, it's designed particularly for the conditions of the African American community, right? And so you can see that reflected talking about education, school boards, talking about the significance of culture, right? And how culture should be tied to Africa as well. Talking about ending economic exploitation in the Black community as well, right? And protecting the community, that emphasis on self-defense. These are all things that, yeah, it can be applied in Africa in some context, but very, very particular to the African American experience. So I think, the structure, spirit, definitely there. But also the particularities, like you said, I think are also important to highlight as well.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Walimu. So I know that let me say this now as a preface to Mwalimu's next comment. So when I sent y'all out the prompts, y'all will remember this. One of them was like the OAU as a defeat of Pan-Africanism and the United States of Africa idea. And he wrote me back and said, wait a minute, that's the wrong language used. Why are you talking about defeat? Compromise maybe, but defeat. So I don't know. I think we might, perhaps I have a more critical view of the OAU. But anyway, I'm turning it over to Mwalimu now for your take on this and the viability of patterning an organization after the OAU.
Thank you. Number one, the struggle of the OAU, struggle of the OAAU are struggles about human beings and human dignity. That's the first and foremost question that Malcolm X had. Black people are human beings. The intellectual culture of liberalism denied the humanity of Africans. In the Atlantic Charter in 1941, when they thought of setting up the United Nations, and in 1948, when they established the Human Rights Council of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there was no rights for Black people and Africans. So the struggles of the OAU were struggles for African dignity, the right for self-determination, and the struggles against colonialism. This is 80 years ago, and those three struggles are still relevant. The struggles against colonialism today in 2025 in Mayotte, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Cayenne, Western Sahara, and in most places where Africans live, these are still questions on the agenda for the African Union and for African Americans. We have to go back to the questions of self-determination that were placed on the table. When the OAU was formed as a compromise between the Imperial Front that killed Patrice Lumumba and the Moroccan, they call it the Morocco and Monrovia group. That division led to the compromise where when Nkrumah went to the conference and called for the unification of the people of Africa, and they said, well, we will maintain the states of Africa within their existing boundaries. That was the compromise. But they did not compromise on the fundamental question. That is the struggle for self-determination. And then it meant that legally, diplomatically, politically, Africans had a base in the international arena to struggle for self-determination. So Namibia, Angola, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Jamaica, all of those countries derived their legitimacy from the platform of the United Nations. We can critique the United Nations, but the fact is, unlike the League of Nations, it is a platform for struggle. It's not nothing grand about it. Malcolm X and the OAAU put forward the same struggles for self-determination for Black people in the United States, Black people in the Caribbean, Black people in Brazil. And these are questions that we should still have on the table. We in the academy should still be talking about independence for Puerto Rico because no country in the Caribbean can be free without independence. So the OAAU supported the independence of Puerto Rico, supported the independence of Martinique. It is our task to ensure that we bring that to our young people, that we should not go on talking about the exceptionalism of US imperialism, but to bring them back to the language and ideas of Malcolm X and John Henry Clark and those brothers and sisters who saw self-determination in Africa, self-determination in the Caribbean, self-determination in the United States as one struggle of Black people and as oppressed people.
I want to say that I see the point of the UN being a platform of struggle, but that's all it is. Like, it's just a platform where people talk. Nothing comes out of it because if it did, Palestine would not be in the situation that it's in now. The United States would not be in the situation that it's in now. So the platform is there and people can talk and people can write resolutions, which they've done, right? They've condemned how many different political leaders over the decades, but has it actually ever led to anything? And the way that the United Nations is set up, when you have certain countries that have essentially more power than others and it's not actually equal or equitable, it will never not be actually an imperialist organization. Even though the majority of people, at least that we at this point see on social media, we can say a lot of people may speak up against the atrocities around the world. The United Nations has no power to do anything. So how is it useful?
Let me say, at any moment in history, we have to look at the balance of forces. 40 years ago, when the United States of America attempted to make the freedom fighters in Southern Africa terrorists and labeled all the freedom fighters terrorists, it was within the international arena and the African Union, Africa OAU, that Africans were able to make their case to say that the ANC or SWAPO or FRELIMO or MPLA is not a terrorist organization. Reagan, Carter, and all of these governments wanted to make them terrorist organizations, which would legitimately say that they're pawns of communists and therefore they should be crushed. The Africans fought in the Human Rights Council to the point where it was agreed internationally that apartheid represented a crime against humanity. So I'm agreeing with you, my sister, that there are hawking shops. But just as how the struggle then, from 1948 until 1978, they fought for 30 years to delegitimize the South African government. We are in a similar struggle today. The fact that it is now on the agenda that the Israeli occupation of Gaza and Palestine is an act of apartheid is part of the struggle, and it is not going to be won easily. Just as the struggle against apartheid was not won easily, it was years of pedantic military, political, diplomatic struggles. And that is where we are. And that's why I say it's a platform of struggle. It's not nice, but we have no other choice but to struggle with what we have.
I guess I feel like Malcolm X wanted us to have other options and wanted us to go after those other options. And I think that the only way, personally, I think that the only way we will find not just justice, but liberation is outside of the political platform. Because the political platform is what put us in the situation that we're in now and continues to
Malcolm X,
keep us in these situations.
but Malcolm X went to the United Nations. Malcolm
Oh, I
X
know he
won.
went. I know he. I'm saying I'm not saying he didn't win, but I'm saying it's not that he said this is the only way, right? Like he. I think that what I'm saying is that we can't. I guess what I'm saying is that yes, there's the political struggle, but the political struggle is not the only struggle. And if we limit ourselves to only the political struggle, then we are limiting ourselves in its totality. We will never get full justice. So we're going back to the OAU. With that point, it's like that was focused on the political struggle, which means that it always had its limitations because you do not fight a beast in one direction. You have to surround it from all directions.
But Jackie, the OAU, the battle at the United Nations was not a battle over politics. It was a battle over whether our brothers and sisters in Angola and Mozambique had the right to bear arms. They were fighting militarily, but the United States were saying they were terrorists. So we're not saying that they're going to the United Nations only. They were fighting in the United Nations to legitimize the rights of people in Africa to bear arms against apartheid. So they were in struggle, but the armed struggle had to have a diplomatic component to it.
That makes sense.
Okay. I don't
So-
like asking permission from anybody. Like I don't need the UN to legitimize me. I think that basically what it boils down to, at least from my perspective, is that no matter what happens in the United Nations, no matter what the United Nations says, the Western and imperial powers will always do whatever they want to do. So even if they say, oh no, you all are not actually terrorists, that does not mean that the CIA or whoever is not going to, insert themselves. So I'm saying I see this as valuable, but I only see it as valuable to a certain extent. And I also see that value as being very minimal because nobody has yet to stop the United States. Nobody has yet to do it.
That is not true. The United States was militarily defeated in Southern Africa by Africans who fought against apartheid. The United States was defeated in Angola With the fight, the United States has been defeated. They were defeated in Vietnam. They were defeated
Korea.
in Vietnam 50 years ago. They ran with their tail. So the point is, the United States did not always have their way. People engaged them militarily in battle. But when the Vietnamese engaged them in battle, they needed diplomatic and political support from elsewhere.
Okay, I guess let me clarify. I don't mean U.S. never had a chance in Vietnam. I don't even know that they never had a chance there. But what I'm saying is, as far as like the United States as a global superpower. So I'm not saying small battles have not been won,
The
right?
United States has not won any war. The last war the United States won was in Grenada.
I'm not
The
really talking
United
about
States was
war.
defeated in Afghanistan. It was defeated in Iraq. It
I'm
was
not talking about
defeated.
war.
Afghanistan, Iraq.
I'm not
Yeah.
Hey,
talking about war though.
hey, hey,
I'm talking about ideologies. That's what I'm saying. I'm talking about ideologies and I'm talking about on the global platform, right? I'm not really not talking about war. On a global platform, as far as ideologies, who is the United States actually bow down to?
so we're going to get
Sorry to
Nicholas
claim it.
in. We're going to get Nicholas in here, and then we're going
So
to move on.
I would say the U.S. bowed down to Japan a few weeks ago, when
That's
Japan no
right.
longer
With the bond
agreed to extend
market.
credit to them.
Precisely.
Um, yeah, or I think the U.S. bowed down to China, in this tariff battle as well. That's
Right.
just economically, right? And the U.S. is shaking in its boots at the moment as the dollar is being moved off by the rest of the world. But I think you both make great points. Um, I'd say, Dr. Campbell, the legitimacy of the that one gets with the UN is invaluable, I think. Just because if even if you're not getting anything material, right, coming from the UN allows you a stage and a venue to control the narrative, right? It gives you a space to advocate for your nation, for your people. So if we look at Ghana, Ghana is advocating not just for itself at the UN, but other nations that are still colonized, right? Those revolutionary parties are having spaces where their struggles can be broadcast to the world, right? We have Malcolm who even says the media is one of the biggest weapons, right, of the US, right? And so this is a space where that can be counteracted in to a certain degree. And this idea of Malcolm saying we need to go to the UN as opposed to relying on the US media, right, to control the narrative, I think that's a logical jump to make, to advocate in that space at least. But also to Jakia's point, I'll say that I don't think Malcolm was saying that the UN was the end all be all. I think if we read the OAAU's charter, I think it's pretty clear that this is a struggle. This is an organization that intends to fight the struggle on multiple different fronts, right? At the UN, yes, right? Through revolutionary Pan-Africanism, yes, but also through the Black nationalism that Malcolm is preaching at this time as well in the Ballad of the Bullet, right? Economically, putting this the cultural component, the taking control of education, economics in our communities, and also at this time, I think Malcolm is also dedicating himself to participating in any Black liberation struggle anywhere. Right. He says that he wants this organization, the OAAU, to join the civil rights movement, to join the civil rights struggle. Right. He's willing to work with any organization that says they're for Black liberation. Right. And so I don't think he's saying that's the end all be all. I'm saying I think he wants to put his stake in any venue, right, that could lead to this idea of Black liberation, and it's just one with the UN, I think.
Can I just make one additional point?
Okay, just one though.
Yeah. In the speech in the Audubon Ballroom in December 1964, when he talked about the importance of Africa, Malcolm stated that if you have all this, at that time, probably 25 African countries were independent, but now we have 54. If 54 African countries are unified in a unified Africa, and you have 23 countries in South Central America run by Africans and African Americans as a decisive force in US politics, that's a decisive shift in international politics. And that's what the OAAU was looking forward to, a decisive shift where the unification of the people of Africa, the independence and leadership of Black people in Brazil, Colombia, Jamaica, Haiti, and Black people in America changes international politics fundamentally. I think that's what we're talking about with Malcolm X.
Agreed.
All right. Well, let's bring Malcolm back in, and it still all leads out to all these questions because we still are going to come back to Pan-Africanism. And looking at the time, I think we can do it. Well, we'll see, though. We'll see. All right, let's come back to Malcolm. We talked about how he comes back, starts the OAAU, and leaves very quickly, leaves 10, 11 days later. The main purpose of that trip, he's going to be gone for 4.5 months, as you can see from the screen. But the immediate impetus for the trip was, in fact, for the second summit of the let me get it right, the OAU. And it's in Cairo this time. It was founded in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Next year, we're in Gamal Nasser's Egypt for the second summit. July 17th to the 21st there as well. His main stated objective is to win support amongst the African nations for his UN campaign, for bringing the United States before the UN, the United Nations. And he has been encouraged to think that this might be something that the OAU might seriously put on the table. So, what? Y'all can't read this, I know, but I want to read just a few short excerpts from the written appeal to African heads of state that he actually, with a memorandum that actually gets to submit to the OAU. He doesn't get to speak before them, but he does get to submit this. And I wanted to read a couple of paragraphs here and there, and we'll look at the OAU's response, and we'll discuss this significant historical episode. All right. Let's get to I'm going to read the first paragraph. All right. Your Excellencies, the Organization of Afro-American Unity has sent me to attend this historic African Summit Conference as an observer to represent the interests of 22 million African Americans whose human rights are being violated daily by the racism of the American imperialists. We strongly believe that African problems are our problems, and our problems are African problems. We also believe that as heads of the independent African states, you are the shepherd of all African peoples everywhere, whether they are still at home on the mother continent or have been scattered abroad. All right, I just want to read like some short, not that much. All right. If the U.S. Supreme Court Justice a few weeks ago could find legal grounds to threaten to bring Russia before the United Nations and charge her with violating the human rights of less than 3 million Russian Jews, what makes our African brothers hesitate to bring the United States government before the United Nations and charge her with violating the human rights of 22 million African Americans? We pray that our African brothers have not freed themselves of European colonialism, only to be overcome and held in check now by American dollarism. Don't let American racism be legalized by American dollarism. America is worse than South Africa. And then, to the end, we beseech the independent African states to help us bring our problem before the United Nations on the grounds that the United States government is morally incapable of protecting the lives and the property of 22 million African Americans, and on the grounds that our deteriorating plight is definitely becoming a threat to world peace. From here on in, if we must die, we will die fighting back, and we will not die alone. We intend to see that our racist oppressors also get a taste of death. Just a little bit more. We are well aware that our future efforts to defend ourselves by retaliating, by meeting violence with violence, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, could create the type of racial conflict in America that could easily escalate into a violent worldwide bloody race war. In the interest of world peace and security, we beseech the heads of the independent African states to recommend an immediate investigation into our problem by the United States Commission on Human Rights. Don't escape from European colonialism only to become even more enslaved by deceitful, friendly American dollarism. There's a little bit more, but I just want y'all to get a little bit of flavor of the appeal that he actually, like I say, he actually gets it. He gets them to receive it. He gets the OAU to receive it, and of course we have a response. And so let's look at the official response that the OAU puts, on the record, in light of listening to Malcolm X. There's not much there, as you can see. I don't even want to read all of it. But let's get to the points. Number one, OAU reaffirms its belief that the existence of discriminatory practices is a matter of deep concern to member states of the Organization of African Unity. And number two, urges the government authorities in the United States of America to intensify their efforts to ensure the total elimination of all forms of discrimination based on race, color, or ethnic origin. So that's the response that he gets at the OAU. And so what do we make of this? What do we make of this moment in what? In Afro-American African relations?
Moment is not past. This moment is with us. The World Conference Against Racism took the question that Malcolm took in 1964 to the World Conference Against Racism. And for 20 years, the World Conference Against Racism has been placing the question of the permanent forum to discuss racism. So the question is not a question of 1964. It's a question of 2025. It is still with us.
And I'd add that these are the same questions, that were being urged to be included in the resolutions of the Pan-African Congresses in the 1920s, right? The same condemnations of racism are there. So I think it's consistent, within these resolutions from these type of organizations, and it's reflective of a continued struggle, as Dr. Campbell has said.
Man, I react a little differently to this. I see this as as absolutely nothing. It's like we ain't paying any attention to what you're saying. We're gonna put forward the most anodyne, the most milquetoast, the most nothing burger response. And by the way, I also would add that, and this is also from hindsight, so we gotta admit, scholars like us always have to admit, we are doing hindsight like a big dog. But in hindsight, I mean, he really shouldn't have expected any more than this. But this is nothing. So I'm going a little direct than you all are on this.
I'd say also, he's talking about American dollarism, right? That re-enslavement that he's talking about has already happened in Africa, right? Yeah. Neocolonialism has already taken hold, right? And so that absolutely impacts the way that these nations are going to talk about the United States and how they're going to condemn racism or any foreign policy from the U.S. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So this is why Kwame and I are best friends, because I wouldn't even call this lip service. They didn't even pretend to offer anything. Urging somebody to do something is not doing anything. So I think that this is part of the issue here, is that Malcolm X saw this organization and saw the potential of this organization, yet the reality of this organization is nothing but shallow. So At the same time, though, you had leaders across the continent who were actually anti-imperialist. So it's not like, I mean, so it's not like anybody can say like, oh no, this represented all African leaders. It doesn't. But it does represent again the power of the United States.
Yes. Yes.
It also, again, talking about the dollarism, the neocolonialism, the the foreign aid, which is nothing but shackles, right? This started taking place, but it didn't have to. And I even come to wonder if it if forming this organization was even a kind of a way to try to present themselves as being autonomous and independent when they knew at the end of the day behind their backs they were accepting dollars from the West. Well, I mean, I guess depending on whichever way people were going during the Cold War and things like that. But yeah, I mean, I think that this is, I mean, totally useless. At least they responded. So I guess we can say that. Thanks for a response. Didn't leave us on red. But how much power does the OAU have versus how much power the OAU could have if the African leaders actually did come together and actually stood by the words that they wrote down? What if they actually were against colonialism, neocolonialism, discrimination, imperialism, and to that end, not only across the continent, but across the global Black world? And we see that here, it was just talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, if Amilcar Cabral, you know, was entertaining this question, he would say, you know, look, what would you expect from the OAU? You know, who are these people? Like, he would emphasize a point that I think you all have made at various points here in this conversation. You know, the power, maybe not hegemony, but certainly the great power of imperialism. You know, like I say, we're in the Cold War, and listen, Jackie, I know you said, oh, there are a number of progressive governments in Africa at this time and such like that, but I don't think anybody was willing to take on the United States on that level. Well, there's a couple of points to that. One being is you knew you weren't going to get anywhere with it, right? I mean, you can't take the UN.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That's simply defeatism. That is simply defeatism. I cannot accept this.
Okay. Okay.
Number one. Number one.
Okay.
In 1964, when they established the OAU Liberation Committee in Dar es Salaam, and Tanzania opened up military bases to support freedom fighters, that was not lip service.
No, it wasn't.
The Tanzanian government made sacrifices. The United States killed the leaders of liberation movements, Modlane, Lumumba,
yes.
Samora Machel. So we're not talking about people just talking. The peoples of Africa made sacrifices. The United States intervened to kill those leaders like Olympio. So we're not talking about liberation in a vacuum. Tanzania had to reorganize its whole economy and society to be able to support liberation movements. So you're talking as if Africans did nothing to fight for liberation against imperialism.
Oh,
I
no,
think
no,
it
we
is a
didn't
lack
say
of
that.
respect.
I don't
No,
think
no, I would say, I explicitly, I explicitly said that there were individuals, there were leaders, there were national leaders who were anti-imperialist. What we're talking about right here is this organization. So we're saying that the organization did not represent. Basically what we're saying is we cannot use this organization as an example of all of the African leaders because there were a few who were actually sacrificing and who sacrificed their lives. Like their lives were on the line and their lives were actually taken because they refused to let their country fall under the imperialist thumb. So that I don't think that was. So I mean, we're agreeing with you. At least I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. You haven't said anything I disagree with at all, Maulimu. I was making a very specific point that nobody was going to bring that case, the case against the United States, to the United Nations. Not that there was nothing, like everything that you just said, about support for liberation movement. I was just talking about this specific political action that Malcolm seemed to think he had a chance of succeeding. And I'm saying, I'm just really making that real politics sort of statement. Nobody was going to do that. No one's going to do that specific political action because
you don't know that because the process from the time Malcolm X started the OAAU to the point he was killed in 1965 is less than that. So you don't know whether the Egyptians were going to take it up, whether the Ghanaians, and you notice the leader that entertained Malcolm X in Ghana was overthrown by the CIA. Kwame Nkrumah was definitely, along with Nyerere, supporting what Malcolm X was doing, and he was overthrown. So I cannot accept this thing that African leaders weren't going to do something about what Malcolm X. If they were not going to do something, Nyerere would not have met Malcolm X at State House. Nkrumah would not have met Malcolm X at State House. The Africans themselves, even with their limited resources, were willing to support their brothers and sisters in the United States of America.
So I think that, like even using Nyerere as an example, is that he wanted an independent nation, and because of his desire for an independent nation, um, the U.S. started to, cut Tanzania out of the global market. They tried to squeeze Tanzania and bring Tanzania to their knees. So I think that I think that also goes to like the idea of the OAU is that the OAU works if people are working it as a collective. It couldn't be one country here, one country there, one leader here, one leader there, which is what it was, right? But had there been a collective agreement to not just speak, but also to act, again, collective, then I think that today we wouldn't be dealing with the racism that we are dealing with. We wouldn't be dealing with the injustice that we are today in the United States or globally, because we know that the world depends on Africa. And if African leaders say, you depend on us, therefore you treat our people right, then people will start acting right. But because African leaders have not, as a collective, and haven't given consequences, haven't imposed consequences on these other nations, right? Then things just haven't happened. But where we see that does happen in different Asian countries, right? Where they're like, hey, we see you acting up over there with our people. Therefore, here goes some consequences. But we don't see that coming from the African continent as a collective. If the OAU did this, moved as a collective, then the ideology that Malcolm X had and the goals that Malcolm X had would have been realized if Africa as a continent had backed him versus just Nyerere, versus just Lumumba, right, versus these particular individuals.
So I think we're looking at the OAU the wrong way. I think the OAU, again, we're all very clear that the OAU was a compromise, and Dr. Tequemi even called it a defeat, right? Not that I would call it a defeat of Pan-Africanism. Right. I mean, but a compromise, right? Nonetheless, in bringing together of two different sides of the spectrum when it comes to this idea of Pan-Africanism. So I think you have the more radical Casablanca and the more conservative Monrovia coming together. And so I think from the beginning, this organization was never destined, right, to take up revolutionary action. I think this was a pragmatic group of heads of states that are trying to operate as a union of governments, right? Not trying to create a United States of Africa. Because I think the way you're conceiving of, right, of like living up to Malcolm's expectations is more akin to Nkrumah's idea of a United States of Africa, which the OAU was never going to do from the beginning, right? Like the majority of the OAU was against that idea of Pan-Africanism, right? And so I don't think like we should expect that from the OAU, right? But the OAU has its place, right?
But that's
and it's just not point. For that.
Sorry, but I think that's the Claymay's point of like Malcolm X. I don't even know why he thought that they would be supporting him in that way because look at the people. This isn't a group of Kwame Nkrumahs, right? So I
Sure.
think to your point, this is a pragmatic group, and to Kwame is saying had Malcolm X accepted the fact that this was a pragmatic group, right? I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure he knew it, but just accepted that. Then there never would have been these expectations, but for any action, because
But I
there
think
was never going to be that type of action.
but I think the idea of unity, right? The what the OAU represented, right? The idea of taking that idea of unity and bringing that back to the United States, right? I think that's what Malcolm was very much so concerned with, right? And I think if he thought that, the OAU was going to do everything that he was asking for, then he wouldn't have had these follow-up meetings with Nkrumah, right? Talking about these talking about these things and his objectives, right? I think he knew who he could go to specifically for that, right? And we know that, yes, there were those very individual specific people, right? Specific heads of states that were going to support, right, this type of revolutionary action. But again, I think I don't know. I'll leave it there.
Agreeing with you. I mean, I would say I'm not disagreeing with you, Nick, at all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I just don't want to rule out what the OAU was in particular, right? I'm not. I don't want to say
Not
that
only
it's.
not only that, I want to stress that then and now, 1963, 2025, the minority progressive forces in Africa are always the one that takes the political, ideological, and military leadership. You may have 50 countries in Africa, but even the 40 reactionary countries dare not in the United Nations or in the OAU vote against support for Southern Africa. Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Kenya collaborate with South Africa, but they would never dare oppose it because the masses of the African people were with support for African, and that's what we want to focus on, not what the governments were doing, but where the masses of the African people were. The masses of Kenyan people, Nigerian people, people in Ivory Coast, or even Liberia supported African liberation. So no African leader like Hastings Banda, who talked about dialogue with South Africa, could get anywhere with that talk. So even though the countries that were fighting against apartheid and Rhodesia were in the minority, the mass of the people, just as today, France and the United States, the United Arab Emirates are in Africa. They have billions of dollars, but the mass of the people are not with them.
Yeah, I mean, agreeing, but I think that just going back to what Nick said, the last slide that Tukweme had was basically our reactions of Malcolm X reaching out to the OAU. And I think we all kind of have come to a consensus. I mean, so what we were saying was not that we were saying we didn't have expectations of the OAU. And if you're saying those expectations have never been there, if you know the group, right? And that's kind of like, I think we all saying the same thing, but just in different ways. Of it's Malcolm X had a again, I still think that he was looking at potential, right? And I mean, I think that he put a lot of faith in that potential, but that potential just didn't come to fruition. But he was taking the OAU to another level, and I think he's taking the OAU actually back down to a grassroots level, a collective grassroots level, which would have a larger impact. I would say a more immediate impact, particularly on the people, right? Not maybe even not the governments, but the people. And if the people are empowered, then the government has no choice but to listen.
All
Yeah.
right, then. Well, let's move this thing along because we got a half hour left, so we gotta make some tracks and probably have to cut some stuff. But anyway, all right, got the another screen up. So we said Malcolm was really traveling internationally, mostly in Africa, for those 4 months between July and November, late November when he comes back. The bulk of that time, actually, he's in Egypt. July, August, and September. And then, you see it as laid out there. October, he's over in East Africa, and November, he's like in West Africa, although Algeria, of course, is North Africa. Anyway, so what? I got a couple of pictures up. One, and this will relate to the next screen. Actually, wants to look at something Malcolm X is going to write for an Egyptian newspaper relative to the Palestinian question. Here we have a picture of him with the Palestinian Liberation Organization, it's a, not umbrella group, a coalition of about 10 different groups. And they come together in 1964, wanting their own state, looking to certainly get that land back that was stolen from them by the Israeli state. Like I said, we'll get to that in a second. Here's Malcolm in Ghana. The second trip, I believe this is the second trip. He hits him up in like May, and I think this is from November. It could be early, I'm not sure. A nice picture, although, no, I shouldn't say although. I wonder what Malcolm X thought here, I mean, this, you know what? I know we can't talk about it, so let me just put this out here, and we're going to move on from it. Man, what kind of government do you got where you got like 10-foot statues of the president for life? With all there is to say about, about the great Kwame Nkrumah, look at what happened there, look at what happened, look at what they allowed to happen there as well. All right, I'm going to leave that alone. But like I say, you should be highly suspicious anywhere you go around and you got gigantic statues of the head of state. That is an issue in and of itself. But we are going to go to the Palestine question and look at, I'm going to read a little bit from what he writes in the Egyptian Gazette in his travels. This is September of 64, Zionist Logic, and I just read a couple of paragraphs, and see our reaction to it. They cripple the bird's wing and then condemn it for not flying as fast as they. The imperialists always make themselves look good, but it is only because they are competing against economically crippled, newly independent countries whose economies are actually crippled by the Zionist capitalist conspiracy. They can't stand against fair competition. Thus they dread Gamal Abdul Nasser's call for African-Arab unity under socialism. And he winds up, this is the last part of the essay. Do the Zionists have the legal or moral right to invade Arab Palestine, uproot its Arab citizens from their homes, and seize all Arab property for themselves just based on the religious claim that their forefathers lived there thousands of years ago? Only 1,000 years ago, the Moors lived in Spain. Would this give the Moors of today the legal and moral right to invade the Iberian Peninsula, drive out its Spanish citizens, and then set up a new Moroccan nation where Spain used to be, as the European Zionists have done to our Arab brothers and sisters in Palestine? In short, the Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history, not even in their own religion. So, I just discovered this essay actually a few weeks ago, I suppose, and I was, I was glad to hear him, making a, progressive statement about this part of the world. And of course, you all, Marlene and the rest of you too, talking about the issues that Malcolm was involved in were living issues. And of course, there's nothing still more absolutely 100% resolved, 100% unresolved than like the continued violent occupation of Palestine. Uh-oh, y'all just let that one go. Should I move on?
No, of course not. Of course not. I'm waiting for the young ones to come.
That's right. He's laying in the cut. He's waiting for you young people. Jakir's like, hey man, he said it all. Let's move on.
That's basically where I'm at. Yeah, but I will let Nick and Dr. Campbell go ahead.
I think when we read this, I think we're reading a Malcolm X that is kind of free from the bounds, or I guess the confines, right, of the Nation of Islam, right? And so he's branching out and making deeper connections. And it gives credence to this idea that Malcolm himself was even moving towards a socialist or an internationalist consciousness, right? By even feeling the need to speak out about this colonial situation that we have in Palestine. And quite honestly, I think it's very profound, because this is him openly criticizing Israel, right? And it draws my attention to Nkrumah's seminal book, Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism. And that entire book is him going in on the U.S. and this new model of neocolonialism that's coming. But he says nothing about Israel, who is doing the exact same thing to Ghana that he's criticizing the U.S. of doing as well, right? And so I just think that Malcolm is taking a stand, and I think being very brave and, of course, honest. This is what we expect from Malcolm to be doing, and doing it in an eloquent way, discrediting their claims in law and in their religion itself, right? And of course, he does this while he's in Egypt, a nation that's been in open war with Israel as well, right? So he's of course, in Malcolm's fashion, not afraid to draw that line and tell you exactly where he stands. So yeah, I love it.
And to think that Malcolm wrote this in 1964. This was 3 years before this war that is called the 6-Day War,
Right.
when Israel expanded its boundaries in Jerusalem and took over Sinai and Lebanon and Jordan. To think that the expansionism had not yet begun, and to think of the complicity of our leaders in our community who call themselves political leaders in not condemning the genocidal politics and genocidal actions which the South African government brought before the International Court of Justice. I'm glad our brother brought this to our attention, because throughout West Asia, as we saw last week when the President of the United States went to these 3 countries, and all 3 countries that he went to are at the forefront of undermining African independence, supporting the Zionist entity. All 3 countries were involved in the destruction of Libya. I think some of you know my book, Global NATO on the Catastrophic Failure in Libya. Qatar actually mobilized 5,000 troops to go into Libya to kill the leader of Libya that wanted to have one African currency. So what we have to use these moments to do, to bring to the attention of young people in our communities, that what Malcolm was saying in 1964 has not gone away. The United Arab Emirates house the most conservative mercenary forces of white racists who want to go to recolonize Africa. So we should use those words to bring it into a modern context.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, we haven't heard from Malcolm in a while, so let's hear a 2-minute clip. It's actually back when he was in the Nation of Islam, but he's not talking about Pan-Africanism per se, but it definitely his take on one of the major episodes in the end of colonialism on the African continent.
And our beautiful brothers, the Mau Mau, who were patriotic soldiers fighting in defense of Kenya, their homeland. When the white man would go to them with his pole and say, "You belong to the Mau Mau?" I ain't never heard of the Mau Mau. You know, the white man is so naive. He actually expected that African to tell him that he was one. And the one who so faithfully told Boss, I never heard of him, Boss. He got Boss's head when Boss went to bed. And so I tell him the same thing here in America. When he run around asking black people, are you a Muslim? Our people say, I never heard of him, boss. And that's what he wants to hear. Tell him just what he wants to hear. I never heard of him, boss. Rock him to sleep. Send him to bed. Now, if I was Cassius Clay, I'd make that rhyme out. But I'm not Brother Cassius. So I think I'll let it stop right there.
Just a couple of words from Malcolm. All right, we're winding this thing on down. Let me take a look and see. Okay, we're good. Yeah, what did I do here? Just want to see where we are. Okay, we're good. We're good. We're actually making somewhat decent time, except I definitely, clearly, obviously didn't leave nearly enough time for this topic here. So we've been talking about Pan-Africanism, and, well, we've been talking about Pan-Africanism. And so does Pan-Africanism have a fixed or consensus meaning? If I asked you, all, each of you all, to give me a one or two sentence definition of what is Pan-Africanism, how do you answer that question? We're going with young people first, so Jackie is back just in time to answer this question. What is Pan-Africanism?
I was going to defer to Nick.
I
Uh,
saw that coming, so I decided to.
exactly. Rude. No, but I think in a very very broad sense, how I would define Pan-Africanism is not only the ideology, but also taking action to support African peoples living life the way they want to live, however that looks.
Okay. What do you say, Dr. McLeod? What is if somebody come up to you and say, what's Pan-Africanism? What do you have for them?
So I'll
Short
do
answer.
it.
Short answer.
Short answer is the way I would explain it to my 8-year-old son, right?
Okay.
At its most basic level, Pan-Africanism is Black unity, being played out over a tremendous scale. It's been many things. It depends on who's wielding it and what they're wielding it for, right? But at its basic level, it is about cooperation and support between African descended people wherever they are, to contribute whatever you can to liberation struggles, where you are and where other African descended folks are. And that can be through protest, it can be through solidarity, it can be through governance, advocating at the UN, right? It could be cultural, it could be religious, it could be in art, it can take several forms. But that Black unity for Black liberation ultimately is what I would say Pan-Africanism is at its most basic level.
Okay. I'm gonna go next and let Mwalimu, come afterwards. All right. Now, see, I feel like the definition you all gave, I mean, okay, but I feel like there's no real content to that. It's a very amorphous thing. My take on it is Pan-Africanism is actually a historical movement that arose with the colonization of Africa. It emerges right in the years after the scramble for Africa, and its object was the liberation of Africa, the end of colonialism in Africa. And when that object was kind of achieved in the 60s, That's really the effective end of what I would call a Pan-African movement that had a specific object. I feel like, that whole United States of Africa idea that Nkrumah and Touré and Nyerere like expressed as a goal, each of them like various degrees of how soon that could happen. I feel I feel like that was really kind of the last manifestation of like a program, right? Pan-Africanism as a movement, not as an idea, not as like a style, not as sentiment, but as an actual program. I actually kind of view it like as a historical movement, man. And in the decades since, there hasn't really been what you would call a concrete object. So it's a more of an amorphous thing. So you all's definition would kind of fit. Now, I'm sure Marlima is gonna get on me for my definition. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not going to get on you because Pan Africanism has always been a wide church, and you'll get as many definitions of Pan Africanism as there are Pan Africanists. But
Okay, okay,
from where
okay.
we come from, the Pan African movement is about the dignity of human beings. Pan Africanism speaks to a very simple concept that human beings must live on the planet. The first Pan Africanists were those who were enslaved, who said that there can be no dignity and freedom unless Black people are free. The shipmate, the women who were fighting against enslavement. The high point of the Pan African movement at that point was the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution sent a message to all Africans that anywhere you come from, you come to Haiti. And that is why they're still against the people of Haiti. And so we have been through many different iterations of the movement. But the fundamental question of dignity says that the people of one part of Africa are responsible for the freedom and liberation of their brothers and sisters in other parts of Africa. And indeed, Black people everywhere were to accept the same responsibility.
Okay.
That definition of Pan Africanism, which was articulated in 1974 by Walter Rodney, has
Mm.
been taken further by women in the Pan African movement who centralize care, life, peace, health as a fundamental basis of Pan Africanism in this point. So the principal conceptualization of Pan Africanism that came from the enslaved is still alive, especially now in this era of robots and artificial intelligence, where they want to turn us into lobotomized human beings. Pan Africanism is even more important now to go back to the basic principle that we are human beings. We want the planet to be a place for human beings. That's what Pan Africanism is about.
Okay. So does that have a programmatic element?
First, the programmatic element is life. It means you have to care for children, you have to care for the community, you have to care for food and health. That means the program of the Pan African movement, if you go back to the Haitian Revolution, the program of the Haitian Revolution was that people should control their own economy. Now, the leaders always had something different. Toussaint Louverture thought they should go back to planting sugarcane and coffee. The people say, no, we're not
Oh,
going to plant sugarcane and coffee. We're going to plant our own yam and banana and cocoa. And imperialism has been against them since that time. Same thing in Africa. The people do not want to produce copper and cobalt. They want food. They want water. They want healthcare. So Pan-Africanism is about the basic dignity. The program is how to produce the life-sustaining goals of people in all parts of global Africa. And because of racism and capitalism, it cannot be achieved under capitalism. So the programmatic basis of Pan-Africanism is anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist.
I can go with that. And I love Walter Rodney's definition as well. I dig it. I dig it. Anybody
Oh
else
no.
want to add to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think that to your question about, the programmatic piece is that I don't think we're ever, okay, we might, but I think it's going to be very difficult to see the type of Pan-African movement that we saw in the early 20th century of this broad collective. But at the same time, and I think it's a number of reasons for that. But I think that we don't necessarily need to see one large movement to see Pan-Africanism in reality, right? I think that Pan-Africanism is, it can be small collectives, it can be individuals, it can be it can be a number of things. It can be different institutions, right? I mean, and I actually may say that I like that more of us moving away from the one leader or spokesperson or things like that, right? And we can all actually take control of our own lives and again and live life in a way that fits us. But that does not mean that living my life this way is not me being unified with somebody else, because I still want them to be able to live life their way. I still want them to also see dignity. So in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual environment, Pan-Africanism will play out differently, but at the core, we're still at the core and at the foundation is still the same. So yeah.
So I'm hearing from y'all is like uh, Black unity, thought and practice.
It's not just
That's
thought.
essentially what I'm hearing.
You have to fight. You can't get healthcare through thought. You can't get water through thought. You cannot get education through thought. It is a struggle for the life-sustaining well-being of human beings, especially Africans, because Africans cannot get their well-being under capitalism. The other point about Pan-Africanism that we learned from Malcolm X and from his parents is that Malcolm X transcends the boundaries that states want to put. Malcolm X's mother was from Grenada,
True.
his father from Omaha, Nebraska. What has happened is the conservatives come into our community and try to put differences between Africans and Caribbean and African Americans, and the petty bourgeoisie and the middle class buys into that and divide our young people with this kind of language. So the Pan-African movement has an obligation to go back to teach people about Malcolm X, because every one of us, even in Africa, live in multi-ethnic, and I like what Jackie said about multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies. So Pan-Africanism must practice the highest form of democratization of relations among human beings in multi-ethnic, multilingual society, and people of different sexualities, because there are people now who support Pan-African leaders who want to kill people of a different sexual orientation. How could you support that kind of Pan-Africanism? And people go out there and they will say, these leaders are great. We have to be rigorous in our support for Pan-Africanism, that we don't tolerate tyrants in our midst and then call themselves Pan-Africanists. We should be, they killed Walter Rodney in Guyana.
Yep.
And we in the Pan-Africanist movement should always be highlighting why they killed Walter Rodney, because Walter Rodney wanted unity between the African and Indian workers. If you remember 1964, that speech that Malcolm X gave, he addressed the question of Guyana in that speech about the relations between Africans and Indians in Guyana and how imperialism is dividing them. So we have to be very alert. And in this moment, in the rise of authoritarianism and pseudo-fascism, they will resort to those kinds of division in our midst and pick up people. And we have to stand up to ICE coming into our communities and picking up people from the Caribbean or from Africa, and to say that these are so-called immigrants. The only people in this country who are not immigrants are the Native Americans.
I'm with you on that 100%.
And
100%.
this is why I start off with unity, right? Because our unity is the basis of any movement, of any organization, any program that Pan-Africanism is going to implement. And I always say, I talk about this in my book, that Pan-Africanism is a response to Pan-Europeanism. Pan-Africanism is necessitated by an external oppressor, right? Coming into our community and necessitating us to unify, right? And to cross these linguistic, these ethnic, these religious boundaries that divide us, right? And so that unity is fundamental to this idea. And we are going to use Pan-Africanism however we need to in a moment, right? If you looked at it in the 30s and the 40s, Pan-Africanism had to be paired with communism, right? If you looked at it before then, Pan-Africanism needed to be paired with reformism, right? And we get to the 1960s and we have the OAU, and there's a complete divide on how that's going to be implemented on the African continent as well, right? And so it's for whoever's wielding it at the moment to define what it's going to be. And like you said, you know, with Haiti, right? It was what they needed it to be, right? With Africans seeking to retain African culture in the United States, right? With Pan-African communities being developed, right? Coming together during times of enslavement as well, right? So anywhere where that unity needs to occur, right? To promote life and liberation in our community is where Pan-Africanism manifests.
Okay, all right, okay. This general topic of Pan-Africanism is certainly one that deserves even deeper exploration, which we obviously are not going to do now with 2 minutes left in our event. So it's time for me to turn to each of you and say thank you very much, of course, for participating in this thing and making it a success. And closing thoughts, closing words. Now, like I said, we got 2 minutes left, so your closing thoughts cannot go for 5 minutes. Oh, those are very brief. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
No. We're still going to talk. The Malcolm X was born in 1925. He grew up in the 1930s in the Depression and World War II. Although the United States had fascistic tendencies, fascism could not win in the United States of America because people like Malcolm X's father, the Garvey movement, the Communist Party, fought against fascism in the streets of the United States of America. Mm-hmm. Today, we should take courage from their fight against fascism to say that regardless of what they do, fascism will not win because the culture of Black radicalism, the Black radical tradition, is not only going to fight, but to transform this country as Malcolm X himself was transformed in the 39 years that he was here on this planet Earth.
Thank you very much, Marlemo. What y'all got, youngsters?
So first of all, thanks for allowing us to be on the panel and sit with greatness. This has been fun. But I think that if we're on the conversation about Malcolm X and especially Pan-Africanism, for me, Malcolm X is an exemplar example. I would say he's an exemplar Pan-Africanist in that, as it was already said earlier, but maybe not explicitly stated, is that on a global platform, Malcolm X was one of the very few who was able, because of his intellect, and willing, because of his courage, to connect the dots globally and to say things that were unpopular as it relates to not only struggle, but also freedom and justice, right? So like as when people were talking about, not many people are going to condemn Israel or let's say the apartheid state of Israel, and also connect that to the experiences of Africans in the United States and connect that to the experiences of people, all over the world. So I think that courage is one thing that always stands out to me. And I think another thing too that I hope we can bring back at some point is the importance of reading books. Because he did. And I feel like a lot of social justice activists today are not equipped with the skills to make those global connections simply because they don't know, because they don't read. They only focus in their silos and don't see how we are connected. And if you don't see how we are connected, then there's no way you can ever be a true Pan-Africanist. because you can't make action on something you don't know. So I really thank Malcolm X for showing us that, for showing us the road, and for showing us, no, you don't need a college degree to pick up a book. No, you don't need a professor telling you to do this to pick up a book. You don't need this to care, but you do need it if you want to make a difference.
I appreciate that too. I appreciate that too. Dr. Mack.
So I'd say that when we think about Malcolm X, I definitely label him as one of the best minds that we've been able to produce here in the hells of America. And I think I love Malcolm's life. I love looking at his life just because of the several transformations that he's gone through. And particularly looking at his Pan-Africanism and the growth that his political ideologies take when he makes that transition to Pan-Africanism. I think it's a lesson for all of us in that Malcolm, while he transitioned to Pan-Africanism, he was still the same Malcolm, right, that was speaking to us in Message to the Grassroots and The Ballot or the Bullet. I think what we're getting with this Pan-Africanism with Malcolm is a Malcolm that is saying that, you know what, we need Black unity, and that means that we need to fight this war on as many planes as possible. So whether it's with the OAU, whether it's the OAAU, whether it's on the streets in Harlem, in Chicago, in the Caribbean, or in Canada, or in Brazil, as he mentions, right? We need to support each other however we can. If that's in the civil rights movement, if that's in electoral politics, right? These are all ways that need to be exploited. There might be different ways that, different methods that people prefer, right? But we don't have the privilege not to exhaust every venue and every avenue that we can possibly seek our liberation through. And I think that's what this is a reminder of. So yeah, again, it's an honor to be here with this esteemed panel. And thank you.
Well, thank you all. Thank all of you all.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, so the last word will be from Malcolm himself. Let me get that screen back up. Like I said, it was lovely to have you all, and I appreciate everything you all said. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna let Malcolm get the last word in. We got, I don't know, this is 1 or 2 minutes long. And after this, that will be the end of our program. Thank you to everyone who tuned in tonight, tuned into the series over the past, whatever that is, 8 months. We will start doing this stuff again in September. So be on the lookout. And thank you very much. All right, let me hit play. Let's get our man in here, Malcolm X.
And all thinking people today who have been oppressed are revolutionary. Anytime you find somebody today who's afraid of the word revolution, get him on out of your way. He's living in the wrong era. He's behind time. He hasn't awakened yet. This is the era of revolution. Now, I must just take time to clarify what I mean before some of these pencil scratchers misquote me, but they're going to do anyway. You know, it was 2 years ago, the American press was calling your and my struggle a revolution. Negro revolution. Negro revolution. Now, they didn't mind calling it that, and they didn't mind you referring to it as that, because they knew what was happening was no revolution. But if you start using the word revolution in its real sense, then they get shady. They start classifying you as a fanatic or something subversive or seditious or other than a law-abiding person. But today, you don't understand that we're living in an era of revolution, which means an era of change. When people who are being oppressed want to change, and they don't want a gradual change. They don't want the change to come day by year, or week by week, or month by month. They want to change right now. Students all over the world are the ones who bring about a change. Old people don't bring about a change. I mean, I'm not saying this against anybody that's old, because if you're ready for some action, you're not old. That's how old you are. anytime you begin to sit on the fence and your toes start shaking because you're afraid too much action is going down, then you're too old. You need to get up and out of the way. Some of us get too old while we're still in our teens.
That's it, people. I'm going to just say good night.
Right. See you next time.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll be in touch for sure, Doc.
Thank you. Look after our young people.
I shall try.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.